Welcome, my dear friends, to a continuation of the life of St. Francis of Assisi. I know it's been nearly 2 weeks, maybe longer, since we did a talk on Francis of Assisi, but what's so interesting when I reflect from my week on Iona in the Outer Hebrides recently, that we all have so much in common with Francis. Even the present Pope, the leader of the Catholic Church, he recently went to visit the Poor Clares, founded by St. Clare of Assisi, a dear friend of Francis. They grew up together. And what was so interesting from that meeting with those sisters, he was more or less saying in simple words, we are all a continuation of that love, that burning love that this man had. We all have a particle of that love in us that wants to embrace the poor and the marginalized. Maybe not to the excess that Francis did with Lady Poverty, because it was such a radical vow that he took, but he embarrassed the church. He challenged the church of his day by his witness. That's what's so powerful, so electric about this incredible man, this holy man of God. He didn't use language to direct a personal attack on the materialism and the corruption within the church. He did it in a subtle way, by living the life of a beggar in the 12th century. And it was that life that inspired so many great men, learned men, abbots, priests, lawyers, solicitors, accountants of that period, to renounce their wealth and to find that inner peace. It's an amazing journey. Let's begin. We finished last at the turning point of Francis' journey. As Niemeyer puts out, in coming to Rome, Francis could get away from home, where people knew him and where he was too embarrassed to act on the stirrings of his heart. In Rome, Francis could be himself in public for the first time. Here he could enjoy complete freedom of expression and behavior. No one knew him, so he could be whoever he wanted to be, without the burden of family expectations and baggage to weigh him down. Because in Assisi, Francis, we know, came from a very well-connected family, cloth merchants. Nearly all the well-to-do of Assisi obviously bought their clothes or had them made by his father and mother. So there was a lot of connection there. It was a great adventure for Francis, to be truly liberating. It was a great experience for him, but it came at a cost, and the experience was to shape the rest of his life. Excuse me. This was yet another significant turning point for Francis. Francis was so moved at the few offering left by pilgrims at the tomb of St. Peter that he emptied his purse and gave what little money he had to a group of sick beggars there. Then, in a real demonstration of solidarity with the poor, he swapped clothes with one of them and spent the rest of the day fasting among the crowd of beggars at the entrance to the church of St. Peter. Through this very simple practical step, Francis was deliberately challenging himself about the poor. In Raymond's rather colourful words, with his heart he wanted to love them, but his senses were shuddering away from their ugliness and their rags. Could he, a scented dandy, bear to wear rags and exchange the admiration of the vulgar for their contempt? He proved that he could, and in doing so he identifies with the outcasts of society. He sees the world through their eyes. He discovers his own dependence and littleness. What an amazing challenge that must have been. Because I know when I've not had a wash, like today, been in the garden, pruning and tidying up a lot of the shrubbery. When you work hard at manual work, you obviously are aware of your body odor. And to go without a wash would make me feel very uncomfortable. So to be in that situation and to be in the same rags that are smelling, oh, I take my hat off to him. The discovery was transformational for Francis, and its impact would be enduring. It confirmed what Francis felt about Lady Poverty, and would be a dominant theme through the rest of his life. Poverty for him combined his deep spirituality and empathy with Christ's suffering on the cross, with his unswerving commitment to action, guided by Christ's compassion to those on the margins of society. It was a perfect and powerful combination of drivers, and through this experience, he began to see more clearly the way ahead, that he firmly believed God had laid out for him to follow. In personal sacrifice, there would be joy and fulfillment, he realized. Isn't that incredible? On his way back to Assisi from Rome, Francis had another experience. Excuse me for a moment. Francis had another experience that was to have a profound impact on him for the rest of his life. As he walked in the sunlight through the fields near Assisi, he noticed a figure staggering along the road towards him. He saw that it was a leper, begging for alms. He was filled with fear and disgust, and his instinct was to cover his mouth and nose and keep well clear. But he fought his instincts, got off his horse, went over to the leper, embraced him, and gave him what little money he had. According to Bonaventure, when Francis rode away and turned round to take a final look at the leper, he was nowhere to be seen. Now, that makes you wonder, was this an angel in disguise, or was it Christ himself? I've had many such experiences in my life as a monk, as a nursing monk, as a nurse caring for the dying. I've been blown away with certain situations, for example, nursing an elderly farmer who couldn't speak hardly any English when I was nursing in Wales. And he had the eyes that were so beautiful and pure. And he didn't need to speak English to convey his cry for help, for pain relief. But when I went to cover another nurse on another floor, I came back and nobody knew about that patient. It was an amazing experience, as if it was Christ himself. This was yet another illustration of Francis' notorious impulsiveness. Gosh, I never realized St. Francis of Assisi was impulsive, but he was. Chesterton describes him here as knowing nothing between stillness and swiftness. But his reaction was even more remarkable because of people's attitudes towards lepers in those days. And Francis was no different from anyone else. Lepers lived in leper colonies in isolated rural areas, and they were not allowed to enter the town and cities or to have contact with other people. It's sad, yes, but it's reality. Not everyone then described as a leper actually had leprosy. Many were suffering from widespread effects of consuming contaminated grains, always a consequence of famine. These included eczemas and shingles, skin cancers and putrefying limbs, facial ulcers, and even blindness. As they travelled about and begged for alms, they were required to keep themselves covered with whatever clothes they had, and the law required that they ring a bell or a wooden clapper to warn others that they were nearby. What a painful lot that must have been, to have been a leper in those days. They had no rights under law, and the church taught that their condition was a result of sin. How awful! How awful! The Church of God that was supposed to be there to reach out to the children of God regardless. But here you can see the struggle that Francis had. He was torn, but in the end he embraced the lepers. He embraced them in love. And the love he brought to them was the love of Christ. The incident along the road from Rome was to mark the start of a lifelong commitment by Francis to caring for lepers. From that time on, he would regularly visit lepers to give them alms, show them affection, and even give his own clothes to them. For Francis to deliberately approach the leper and have physical contact with him would have been the ultimate test of faith. Had anyone witnessed him doing so, they would have dismissed him as mad as well as reckless. But for Francis, it was yet another breakthrough moment. It breathed life and meaning into Jesus' statement, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me." How profound. To Niemeyer, this moment shows how Francis came to be reconciled with fear, his fear. With what is repulsive, ugly and dirty, it was a clear example of the old self being deconstructed and the new self being built. Spoto contends that in embracing and attending lepers, he went beyond knowledge to experience. In their unimaginable suffering, he saw the ultimate agony of Christ crucified, Christ abandoned, Christ rejected, alone in his death, apparently rendered powerless against the triumphant malice of the world. But that, faith insisted, was not the end of the story. When Francis arrived back in Assisi in late spring 1206, he picked up where he had left off, rebuilding the ruined church at San Damiano. He walked through the city begging for stones and did all the physical work himself, carrying stones out to the derelict chapel, setting them in place, keeping the original foundations and layout, and restoring the overall structure. He worked alone at San Damiano, living in a small, simple shed nearby. By the late 2007, Francis had finished the rebuilding of San Damiano, and next he set about repairing 2 other small derelict churches in the area around Assisi. First, he tackled the small tumble-down church of St. Peter, San Pietro della Spina, a few miles south of San Damiano, near some property his father owned. That was not a big project, and he completed it in early 1208, not 2008. Next, he turned his attention to the small abandoned Benedictine chapel of St. Mary of the Angels at the Portiuncula, St. Maria della Portiuncula, in a clearing in the forest 2 miles south of the city. The church belonged to the Benedictines on Mount Sabasio, high above Assisi. It had been built on a small parcel of land given by the people of Assisi to Saint Benedict in the 6th century. The site had acquired the nickname Portiuncula, meaning literally little portion, and the name stuck. Raymond describes the scene as one day Francis wandered into the forest, which lay on the flat of the valley, and saw a little ruined chapel among the trees, a little oblong stone chamber with a pointed gable at each end. The trees stood all around it, excuse me, and the grass and the brambles beat up against its crumbling walls. He fell in love with it. He built himself a simple hut nearby and applied himself to rebuilding it. Within 6 weeks, the altar was made usable and services could once again be held here. Francis survived over this period by begging in Assisi for food and materials. 2 of the 3 churches he repaired would have lasting associations with him. San Damiano would become the base for Clare's sisterhood, and St. Mary's would become the base for Francis' brotherhood. One famous story about Francis tells of how one day he was walking to Gubbio, about 20 miles north of Assisi. It was a journey he made quite regularly, but on this occasion he was set upon by some robbers, who stole from him all he had, which was next to nothing. Before they threw him into a ditch filled with snow, Francis allegedly declared himself to be the herald of the great king, just as John the Baptist had announced that Jesus the Messiah would be coming after him. when they attacked him. When he gathered his strength to get up and move on, now naked and freezing cold, according to Solano, Francis simply shook off the snow, and when the robbers had gone, leaped out of the ditch. Wow, in the freezing snow. Seemingly nothing would stop Francis now that he had a taste of freedom, and was determined to pursue it to its logical end. Further along the road came upon the old Benedictine monastery of Santa Maria di Valfabrica, where he sought shelter from the harsh winter weather and floods. The monks were suspicious of this bedraggled visitor who looked like a vagrant. Poor Francis. They took him in but offered meagre hospitality. They offered him no fresh clothes and very little food. Their provisions were in short supply because of the long harsh winter. He was put to work for a few days in the kitchens as a dishwasher in return for bread and soup. When he finally reached Gubbio, Francis met a friend who gave him his first religious habit: a hermit's tunic, a leather belt, sandals, and a stout stick. Francis the solitary hermit, and all his life he would ask himself whether this was not his true vocation. He then set off back to Assisi to resume the rebuilding work. The key to understanding Francis, the man, is his spirituality, his faith, and how he lived it out on a day-to-day basis defined everything he was, everything he did, and how and why he did it. Francis was a true man of faith, a spiritual giant who lived out daily and very publicly what he believed. Raymond concedes that it is difficult to fully understand Francis because he had experiences of reality or God which are above our understanding, so that while we might be following in his footsteps, we can follow in the main only his outer life. Of that long companionship with God which was his inner life, and which supported and enriched his indefatigable labours in the world, we shall not find the footmarks, because they are in the skies. We might not be able to find the physical footprints of Francis' walk with God, but we can certainly catch more than glimpses of them and use them to guide our own spiritual journeys. What a beautiful, beautiful sharing about how he embraced the lepers and how robbers attacked him and mistook him for being another vagrant. And men of God, the Benedictines, looked upon him as a dirty vagrant and made him work as one of their slaves in the kitchens. What courage! What faith! Could you see anybody today doing that? Not really. But there is one man that has stepped out of his comfort zone, like Francis. Guess who it is? We have a man, a holy man, who has a position of authority over many, who's actually emulating the core values of Francis of Assisi. He's a man of God who's tuned in to Radio Francis of Assisi and And throughout his own religious life, as a young student seminarian, as a priest, as a bishop, as a cardinal, and now as Papa Francis, he went all the way to Assisi for his feast day, to kneel in front of him, to find the monk that gave him a tapestry of life, of wisdom, of simplicity. The Catholic Church is so lucky to have such a good man as that in Papa Francis, for he is living the gospel of Christ by his love, his detachment from materialism. He doesn't want the opulence of his position as Pope. He's got rid of all of that. He doesn't live in the palace in the Vatican. He lives in a small, tiny room like a dust cupboard where you keep your brushes and dustpan. A simple chair, a simple table, and a very, very simple bed. Let's just reflect now on this beautiful man of God, whom God used in the 12th century to turn his church around that was corrupt. Like today, the Christian church and other faiths, as well as Buddhism with its in-house fighting, Hindu, Sikh, Islam, they all, like the Catholic Church of the 12th century, they lose their way with bureaucracy, with legalism, clericalism, focusing on the letter of the law and killing the spirit of the law. And that's why I'm so privileged to be a member of the Teo community, a community of ordinary men and women who have this insatiable love to emulate Francis, to be a holy person, to be detached from the world, to be detached from materialism, to be a person of prayer. And in our community, we don't have the red tape, the bureaucracy, the rules and regulations that trigger fear, like I did as a young nursing monk, where you were scared to sneeze in case you got a penance. I didn't find a lot of charity when I was a young nursing monk, but today, in our community, though we're small and we meet online, we have such a love and a respect and a dignity for each other. So let us just for a moment come with Francis into the cave. Let us join him as he kneels on the stone floor and let us together hold each other's hand and allow the Spirit of God come upon us as it has come upon Francis. Let us self-empty all the distractions of modern living and just embrace the simplicity of the now. As we breathe in, we are breathing in the love of the angelic realm. We are breathing in the love of a Father, Mother God who loves us in our brokenness, who bandages our wounds, who provides for us each day we live if we but trust. Francis had nothing. He gave it all away. but in turn he had everything. He heard this bell that represented the voice of his God. He followed it. He followed it, even up to his death when he was blinded. His companion the wolf was there and licked his eyes to keep them moist. And his brothers and sisters were there to love him, to care for him, and when he died, they watched him leave his body. And angels were heard to be singing. But that's in the next installment of the life of St. Francis next week. But for now, just ask this man of God to allow his Spirit touch you and fill you with the love of God. Thank you for your presence this evening. Bless you.